Maria hurried through the busy airport with her small handbag pressed tightly to her side. Her shoes were worn out from months of walking to work, and her heart was racing as she tried to balance the weight of her belongings and the endless thoughts in her head. She had almost missed the trip. The bus she had taken from her small neighborhood had broken down halfway, and she had waited for another one with her nerves growing restless. Every second that passed reminded her of how much this journey meant. She could not afford another ticket if she missed the flight. Her little son, Daniel, was not with her this time. He was staying with her neighbor, Mrs. Carter, a kind elderly woman who always helped when Maria was in need. Maria had explained to her son that she had to make this quick trip for work. He had hugged her tightly and asked if she would bring him back a toy. That small request echoed in her mind as she ran across the shiny floor of the airport, scanning for the gate number on her ticket. She felt sweat gather on her forehead as the announcement for boarding was made. She barely had time to double-check the screen. The letters and numbers seemed to blur together. Her hands trembled, and with a deep breath, she followed the crowd entering through the nearest gate. She was only focused on not missing this chance. The ticket she had bought had cost her almost a week's worth of hard work cleaning offices and waiting tables. She told herself she could not let that money go to waste. The line moved slowly, and Maria's heart thumped in rhythm with the sound of rolling suitcases and boarding passes being scanned. When it was her turn, she nervously handed her ticket to the staff. They gave it a quick look, scanned it, and waved her through. Relief flooded her chest. She walked down the jet bridge, clutching the strap of her bag like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Once inside the plane, the air smelled of leather seats and a faint trace of coffee. She searched for her seat number, her eyes darting quickly between the rows. The passengers around her looked calm, chatting quietly or sliding their bags into the overhead bins. She felt out of place in her simple second-hand dress, but she forced herself to walk forward, hoping no one would notice how nervous she was. Her seat was by the window, and to her surprise, the spot beside her was already taken. A tall man in a crisp suit sat there, typing something quickly on his sleek laptop. His watch shone faintly under the cabin lights, and his polished shoes rested neatly under the seat. He looked so different from her, confident, organized, and surrounded by quiet authority. She lowered her eyes, afraid to seem rude, and carefully slid into her seat. Her heart was still racing from the rush. She clutched her handbag on her lap and stared out the window, trying to calm her breath. She thought about Daniel again, wondering if he had eaten dinner yet or if Mrs. Carter had reminded him to do his homework. The thought of her son gave her comfort, but it also reminded her why she worked so hard. She wanted to give him a better life, a life where he didn't have to feel the weight of struggle the way she did. The man beside her shifted slightly, closing his laptop for a moment. Maria felt the movement and glanced at him quickly. He had sharp features, his hair neatly styled, and his expression calm but serious. She immediately turned her eyes back to the window, embarrassed. She hoped he hadn't noticed. As the flight attendants walked down the aisle, reminding everyone to fasten their seat belts, Maria realized her hands were trembling. She tightened her grip on the seat belt buckle, trying to make it click in place, but it took her 2 tries. She felt a sudden heat in her cheeks. The man next to her glanced at her hands and spoke for the first time. His voice was deep but gentle. "First time flying?" Maria quickly shook her head. "No, just nervous." Her voice was soft, almost lost under the noise of passengers settling in. He gave a small nod and returned to his laptop, not pressing further. Still, Maria's heart raced faster. She wasn't used to speaking to strangers, especially not someone who looked as important as him. She turned her face back toward the window, trying to focus on the lights of the runway outside. When the plane finally began to move, Maria pressed her palms together, silently praying for safety. The takeoff was rough for her. She always hated the sudden push against her back, the roar of the engines, the way her stomach dropped as the plane lifted. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe slowly. The man beside her noticed her tension but said nothing. He simply gave her a short glance and then returned to his screen. Minutes passed before the plane steadied into the air. Maria slowly opened her eyes and exhaled with relief. She leaned back in her seat, though she still clutched her bag tightly. Her mind drifted again to her son. She remembered the way his small fingers had curled around her hand at the bus stop earlier, the way he had waved goodbye with a smile even though she knew he would miss her. That memory brought a sting of tears to her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She didn't want anyone to see her cry, especially not the stranger sitting beside her. The man closed his laptop and set it aside. For the first time, Maria noticed the faint tiredness in his eyes. He wasn't just polished and confident, there was a certain heaviness about him too, though hidden behind his calm face. But Maria did not dwell on it. To her, he was just another passenger, one who belonged to a world far different from hers. The hum of the plane grew softer as the hours stretched ahead. Maria thought about the reason for her trip. She was traveling for a job interview, an opportunity she had fought hard to secure. If she got the job, it would mean more stability for her and Daniel. She would no longer have to juggle two exhausting jobs that barely covered rent. She dreamed of moving into a small but clean apartment with her son, maybe even buying him his own bed instead of sharing hers. The thought gave her a little hope, enough to push away her exhaustion for now. Still, she could not shake off the small worry nibbling in her mind. Something felt odd, though she couldn't put her finger on it. She checked her ticket again, but the words looked blurry under the dim cabin light. She told herself not to worry, that she was on the right path. After all, the staff had let her in. Everything must be fine. Maria rested her head against the cold window, letting the faint vibrations of the plane soothe her tired body. She didn't know that this small mistake boarding a flight without realizing it wasn't the one printed on her ticket was about to change her life forever. For now, all she knew was the hum of the engines, the quiet presence of the man beside her, and the weight of her dreams that she carried silently in her heart. Maria shifted in her seat as the plane leveled out, the lights dimmed, and the soft voice of the flight attendant announced that passengers could now relax. She let out a quiet sigh and tried to loosen her grip on her handbag. Her shoulders ached from the rush at the airport and the long hours she had worked earlier that week. She wanted to close her eyes and rest, but the nervous energy inside her refused to let her. Beside her, the man in the crisp suit had set his laptop aside. For a while, he leaned back in silence, his eyes closed as though he were resting. Maria studied him carefully from the corner of her eye. His face looked calm, but there was something about him, an invisible wall, as though he was used to keeping people at a distance. His hands were folded neatly in his lap, his watch glinting faintly under the cabin lights. Maria quickly turned her gaze back toward the window. She didn't want to be caught staring. She told herself it was better not to think too much about the people around her. Her world was simple, her son, her work, her struggle to survive. She had no place wondering about a stranger who clearly belonged to a world far beyond hers. Still, her heart jumped when he suddenly spoke. "Are you traveling for work?" His voice was calm, deep, but not unfriendly. Maria froze for a moment, then looked at him. "Yes, sort of," she replied softly. She hesitated before adding, "I have an interview tomorrow." He nodded slowly. "That must be important." "Yes," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Very important." For a few seconds, silence hung between them again. Maria thought that was the end of the conversation, but then he asked, "Where are you from?" She shifted uncomfortably, wondering if she should answer. But something in his tone, polite, not demanding, made her relax a little. "From a small town outside the city," she said. "It's not very far, but it feels far sometimes." He gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know what you mean. Maria tilted her head slightly, surprised. She hadn't expected someone like him to say that. He looked as if he had everything: money, success, confidence. What could feel far for him? But she didn't ask. She wasn't used to strangers being interested in her life, and she didn't want to overstep. The man seemed to notice her hesitation. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer this time. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It's just, you looked very rushed when you came in. I wondered if everything was all right." Maria blinked, caught off guard by his observation. She thought back to how she had nearly missed the flight, how she had run through the airport with her heart pounding. She felt embarrassed that it had been so obvious. "I was late," she admitted. "The bus broke down, and I thought I would miss my chance. I can't afford another ticket." There it was, the truth, simple and raw. For a moment she regretted saying it. Most people didn't understand her struggles, and she hated pity. But instead of pity, the man simply nodded, his expression calm, almost thoughtful. "That must be difficult," he said. Maria looked at him, surprised again. His tone wasn't empty or polite, it was genuine. Those words, spoken so simply, carried weight. No one had said that to her in a long time. People usually told her to work harder, to stop complaining, to just accept her life. But here was a stranger, acknowledging that it was difficult, without judgment. The words loosened something inside her. Before she realized it, she began to speak more. She told him about her little son, Daniel, and how she was raising him alone. She explained how she worked long hours cleaning and waiting tables, and how every day was a battle to stretch her earnings enough for rent, food, and school supplies. Her voice trembled when she mentioned the nights she had come home so tired she could barely stand, but still had to help Daniel with homework. She admitted how guilty she felt leaving him with neighbors whenever she needed to work extra shifts. The man listened quietly, without interrupting. His eyes stayed on her, steady and patient. It wasn't the usual hurried attention people gave out of politeness, it was real listening. When she finally stopped, embarrassed by how much she had said, she lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I shouldn't bother you with my problems." But he shook his head. "You're not bothering me. Sometimes it helps to talk." His tone was calm, but there was something deeper in it, a note of understanding. Maria's chest tightened slightly. She wondered about him now. Why was a man like him, so polished, so clearly successful, taking time to listen to her, a struggling mother he had just met? She didn't ask, but he seemed to sense her unspoken question. After a pause, he leaned back in his seat and said quietly, "I built a company years ago. People think that means I have everything. But what they don't see is what it cost me." Maria glanced at him, her eyes widening a little. A company? He was more important than she had guessed. But his tone wasn't boastful. It was heavy, almost sad. "I spent years working, building, chasing success," he continued. "And I achieved it. I have wealth, recognition, influence. But I lost people along the way. Family, friends, relationships. Sometimes I wonder if I've gained anything at all." His words hung in the air, soft but full of weight. Maria looked at him differently now. For the first time, she saw past the sharp suit and polished watch. Beneath it all was a man who carried his own kind of emptiness. She didn't know what to say, so she stayed quiet. But inside, she felt a strange connection. Here she was, a poor single mother with almost nothing, and beside her was a wealthy businessman with everything. Yet both of them carried burdens that left them lonely in different ways. The hum of the plane filled the silence between them. Finally, Maria whispered, maybe you didn't lose everything. Maybe you just haven't found the people who stay." He turned his head slightly, looking at her. For the first time, His smile reached his eyes, though it was faint. Maybe you're right. Maria felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. For a moment, it didn't matter who he was or who she was. It didn't matter that she was poor and he was rich. They were just two people, sitting side by side in the sky, sharing pieces of themselves that they rarely revealed to anyone. The plane lights dimmed further as the flight attendants prepared for the evening service. Passengers around them had begun to doze off, their heads resting against seats. Maria felt a little calmer now, her earlier nerves fading. She hadn't expected to talk so much, but somehow, it felt right. As she leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment, she thought about Daniel again. She wondered what he would say if he knew she had spoken so openly to a stranger. She smiled faintly, imagining his curious little face asking 100 questions. Beside her, the man reached for his laptop again but then paused. Instead, he folded his hands once more, his gaze distant as though he was lost in thought. Maria didn't know what he was thinking about, but she had a feeling that, just like her, he was carrying more than he ever showed the world. And though neither of them knew it yet, this unexpected conversation was only the beginning of something that would change both their lives in ways they could not yet imagine. The hours in the sky seemed to pass more gently after their quiet conversation. Maria no longer felt the same sharp nervousness she had when she first boarded. Her hands, once trembling, now rested more loosely on her lap. She had not planned to speak so openly, but somehow the words had spilled out, and instead of regret, she felt a small relief. It was as if a heavy weight she always carried had been lifted, even if only a little. The man beside her had not judged her. He had listened, truly listened, in a way that few people ever did. She had felt seen, as though her struggles mattered. For someone like her, who often felt invisible to the world, that simple act of listening was more valuable than anything else. Maria tilted her head slightly, studying him when he wasn't looking. He sat upright, his expression calm but distant, as though his thoughts had drifted far away. His sharp suit and fine watch spoke of wealth, but his eyes when he had spoken earlier had carried a quiet sadness. She remembered his words about building a company and losing people along the way. It stayed with her. Success, she realized, was not always the dream it appeared to be. She hesitated before speaking again. Her voice was gentle, almost shy. Do you ever wish you could go back? Before all the work, before everything changed. He turned his head toward her, as though her question had pulled him from his thoughts. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window into the darkness of the sky, where tiny stars peeked faintly beyond the clouds. Sometimes, he admitted quietly. Sometimes I wonder what life would be like if I had chosen differently. But choices are like doors you walk through, and they close behind you. You can't step back, only forward. Maria thought about his words. She understood that feeling. She, too, had walked through doors she couldn't reopen. Becoming a single mother, losing the support she had once hoped for, fighting every day to keep her son fed, those were choices and circumstances that shaped her forever. I think, she said softly, that sometimes forward means finding new people, new reasons. Maybe not going back, but building something better ahead. Her own words surprised her. She wasn't used to speaking like that, with hope. Usually, she kept her dreams hidden, afraid they would sound foolish. But tonight, in the quiet of the plane, with a stranger who somehow felt safe, she dared to let them out. The man looked at her with a long, thoughtful gaze. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "You sound wiser than most people I know." Maria laughed quietly, shaking her head. I don't feel wise. I feel tired. For the first time, his lips curved into a real smile, warm and unguarded. It softened his sharp features and made him look younger, more human. Maria found herself smiling too, though she quickly lowered her gaze, embarrassed. The flight attendant came by with the food service, offering small trays. Maria hesitated before accepting. She wasn't used to airplane meals, and she worried it would taste strange. But when she lifted the lid, the smell of warm rice and vegetables filled the air, and her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since morning. The man beside her accepted his tray without much interest. He picked at it lightly, eating slowly, as though food was simply another task, not something to enjoy. Maria noticed this and thought about the difference between them. For her, food was precious, often stretched carefully so her son could have enough. For him, food was abundant, so common it seemed to hold little value. Still, as she ate quietly, she felt grateful. This small meal gave her strength for tomorrow, and she silently prayed she would do well in her interview. After the trays were cleared, the cabin grew quieter. Lights dimmed further, and many passengers drifted to sleep. Maria leaned back in her seat, her eyes heavy but her mind restless. She thought about Daniel, about the toy she had promised him, about the rent she needed to pay, and about the slim chance this interview could change her life. Beside her, the man spoke again, his voice low as though he didn't want to disturb the silence. "Tell me about your son. You mentioned him earlier." Maria's tiredness lifted at the mention of Daniel. Her face softened as she began to speak. "His name is Daniel. He's 7 years old. He's curious about everything, always asking questions, always wanting to learn. He loves drawing. Sometimes he draws pictures of me at work. He says when he grows up, he wants to take care of me the way I take care of him." Her voice trembled with quiet pride. Talking about Daniel always lit a spark in her heart. The man listened closely, his eyes fixed on her as she described her son's laughter, his stubbornness, his gentle hugs. For the first time in a long while, Maria felt joy in sharing her world. She wasn't just a tired worker or a struggling mother, she was someone with a little boy who gave her strength every day. "He sounds remarkable," the man said softly when she finished. "He is," Maria whispered with a small smile. "He is my reason." A silence followed, but it was not empty. It was filled with unspoken understanding. Maria realized she had learned something about him too. He had money, success, recognition, but no one to call his reason. The loneliness she had glimpsed in his eyes was real. He had built an empire, but he had no child waiting at home, no small voice calling his name with love. For the first time, Maria didn't see him as untouchable. He was human, like her. Just human, longing for something real. The man leaned back, his gaze distant again. "Sometimes," he murmured, almost to himself, "I wonder what it would feel like to have someone waiting for me. A child. A family. Someone who looks at me the way your son looks at you." Maria's heart softened. She wanted to tell him that family wasn't about perfection or wealth, it was about love, sacrifice, and being present. But she stayed quiet, sensing he wasn't ready for advice, only for listening. The plane rocked gently as it moved through a patch of turbulence, and Maria instinctively gripped the armrest. The man noticed and, without a word, steadied her by placing his hand lightly on the edge of her armrest, to not touching her, but close enough to reassure her. It was a small gesture, but it calmed her. "Don't worry," he said gently. "It will pass." And it did. The plane soon steadied, and Maria released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned her head slightly and gave him a grateful smile. He nodded, his expression soft. As the night stretched on, both grew quieter. Maria eventually rested her head against the window, her eyes closing as sleep pulled her in. She dreamed faintly of Daniel, of him running toward her with open arms. She held onto that image, her heart at peace. Beside her, the man remained awake longer. He looked at Maria, at the tired lines on her face, the simple clothes she wore, the way she held onto her handbag even in sleep. She had so little, yet she carried herself with quiet strength. He thought about his own life, filled with luxury but hollow. For the first time in years, he wondered if perhaps true wealth was not in what one owned but in the love one gave and received. The hum of the plane was steady, the cabin calm. Two strangers sat side by side, their lives so different, yet in that quiet space above the clouds, they had shared their humanity. And though neither of them knew it yet, this fragile connection was the beginning of something far greater than either could have imagined. When the plane began its slow descent, Maria stirred from her light sleep. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she was disoriented, unsure of where she was. Then the soft vibration of the engines and the dim light of the cabin reminded her. She straightened in her seat quickly, brushing her hair back with her hand, embarrassed to have dozed off. Beside her, the man was still awake, calm as ever, his gaze fixed out the window. The faint orange glow of the horizon lit his profile, making him look thoughtful, almost distant. Maria hesitated before speaking. Did I sleep long?" He glanced at her and gave a small nod. "For a while. You must have been tired." Maria lowered her eyes. "I guess I was." She felt a little embarrassed. Falling asleep beside a stranger wasn't something she had planned, but the exhaustion of her long days had caught up with her. As the plane tilted gently, preparing to land, Maria pulled her handbag closer and reached inside for her ticket and documents. She wanted to be ready. But as she looked at the ticket again, her chest tightened. Something didn't feel right. The flight number on the paper didn't match the announcement on the speaker. Her heart skipped a beat. Her fingers trembled as she double-checked. She swallowed hard. "No," she whispered under her breath. "This can't be." The man turned to her. "Is something wrong?" Maria's voice shook as she replied, I think I took the wrong flight." He raised an eyebrow. "Wrong flight?" "Yes," she admitted, her face pale. "The number on my ticket, it's not the same. I must have followed the wrong line at the gate. I didn't even notice. I thought as long as they let me through, it was fine." Her voice cracked. "What am I going to do? I don't have money for another ticket. And my interview. I can't miss it." She buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by the mistake. She had tried so hard to make everything work, and yet even here, her struggle seemed to follow her. The man was quiet for a moment, watching her. Then, in a calm and steady voice, he said, "Don't worry. We'll fix this." Maria lifted her head slowly, confused. "We?" "Yes," he said simply. "You don't have to handle this alone." Her lips parted, but no words came out. No one had ever said that to her before. She was used to being alone, used to solving everything by herself, no matter how heavy the burden. The kindness in his tone shook her more than the mistake she had made. The plane touched down with a soft thud, the wheels rolling across the runway. Passengers around them unbuckled their seat belts, stretching and gathering their belongings. Maria's heart pounded as she clutched her handbag tightly, dread filling her chest. When the doors opened, the passengers slowly filed out. Maria walked beside the man, her steps heavy. She expected judgment, expected him to pull away and leave her to deal with her mistake. But instead, he stayed close, his presence steady. At the terminal, Maria approached the airline counter nervously, explaining what had happened. The staff frowned, checking her ticket and then their computer. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the attendant said firmly. "This was not your flight. You'll need to purchase a new ticket for your actual destination. Unfortunately, there are no refunds for boarding the wrong plane." Maria felt her throat tighten. "But I don't have enough money." "Please, there must be another way." The attendant shook their head apologetically. "I'm afraid that's the policy." Tears pricked Maria's eyes. She stepped back, clutching her bag to her chest. This was it, her chance slipping away, just like that. The interview, the hope for a new start, the dream of a better life for her son, it was all crumbling. Before she could say anything else, the man beside her spoke. His voice was calm but carried authority. "Book her on the next flight. I'll take care of the payment." The attendant blinked, surprised, then quickly typed into the computer. "Of course, sir. There's another flight leaving in 2 hours. We can transfer her." Maria froze, her eyes wide. She turned toward him, shaking her head quickly. "No, no, you don't have to do that. I can't accept." But he stopped her gently with a look. "You said this interview is important. Don't let it slip away because of a mistake." Her lips trembled. "But why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." He gave a faint smile, one that was kind but tinged with something deeper. "Because sometimes people need a little help. And because once, long ago, I wished someone had done the same for me." Maria's heart swelled with emotion. She wanted to protest again, but the lump in her throat made it impossible. For the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her struggle lift slightly, not because her problems were solved, but because someone cared enough to stand beside her. The attendant handed her the new boarding pass, and Maria took it with trembling hands. She whispered a soft thank you to the man, her voice breaking. As they moved away from the counter, she tried to steady herself. "I don't know how to repay you," she said. "You don't need to," he replied simply. "Just do well tomorrow. That will be enough." They found a quiet corner of the terminal to sit while waiting for the next flight. Maria looked at him, still trying to understand. His presence was calm, his gestures discreet. He hadn't made a show of his help. He hadn't asked for anything in return. He had simply stepped in, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. For a moment, she wondered again who he really was. He carried himself with quiet authority, the kind that came not just from confidence but from experience. Yet he spoke to her gently, without looking down on her. He didn't act like a man above her world, he acted like someone who understood it in a way. Maria hugged her handbag close and thought of Daniel. She imagined telling him about this moment, about the stranger who helped his mother when everything seemed to fall apart. She smiled faintly, knowing her son would listen wide-eyed, amazed at the kindness of a man they didn't even know. The announcement for boarding echoed across the terminal, pulling her back to the present. Maria stood, holding her new ticket tightly. Before they parted ways, she turned to him once more. "I'll never forget this," she said softly. He gave her a small nod, his expression unreadable but warm. "Good luck, Maria." She blinked, surprised he had remembered her name. Then, with her heart still pounding, she walked toward the gate, her steps lighter than before. Behind her, the man watched quietly, his face thoughtful. For years, he had lived in silence, surrounded by wealth but empty of connection. But tonight, helping a stranger had stirred something in him, a reminder of what it felt like to care, to matter in someone's life. Maria didn't know his name, didn't know his story, didn't know he was more than just a kind traveler. But one day, she would. For now, all she carried was gratitude and a fragile spark of hope, glowing brighter than it had in a long, long time. And so, in the quiet terminal of an unfamiliar city, their paths parted. Yet Maria's heart was still racing as she walked down the jet bridge of the second plane, gripping her new ticket tightly. Every step felt like a gift. Just hours before, she had been certain her dream was slipping away. Now, because of the kindness of a stranger, she still had a chance. She found her seat and settled in, her mind full of thoughts. She replayed the man's words in her head, the way he had spoken so calmly, the way he had taken care of her ticket as though it was the simplest thing in the world. She wanted to thank him again, properly, but he hadn't boarded with her. She realized then that she didn't even know his full name. When the plane landed at her correct destination, Maria hurried to the hotel where she would spend the night. She had chosen the cheapest place she could afford, a small inn near the office where her interview would take place. The room was modest, with a single bed, a desk, and a window that overlooked a busy street. But to Maria, it felt safe, and for that she was grateful. That night, she couldn't sleep much. She kept thinking about her interview. She thought about the questions they might ask, the way she would answer, the hope she carried for her son. And every time fear tried to creep in, she remembered the man's steady voice, "Don't let it slip away because of a mistake." The next morning, Maria dressed in her best clothes, a simple blouse and skirt she had ironed carefully the night before. She brushed her hair neatly and whispered a small prayer before leaving the room. As she walked into the office building, her legs trembled, but she lifted her chin. She had worked too hard to let fear win now. The interview was long, filled with questions about her skills, her past jobs, and how she handled responsibility. Maria answered as best she could, speaking with honesty. She told them about her experience cleaning offices and waiting tables, about how she managed her time while raising her son. At the end, one of the managers looked at her kindly and said, "You've shown a lot of determination, Maria. That matters." When she stepped out of the building, her eyes filled with tears of relief. She didn't know if she had secured the job yet, but she had given her best. And that, she thought, was enough for now. That evening, as she returned to her small inn, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Maria hesitated, unsure if she should answer. But curiosity won. She pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello. Maria," a familiar voice said gently. Her heart skipped. "It's you," she whispered. "Yes," the man replied. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to know how your interview went." Maria smiled, her chest warming. "I think it went well. I don't know if I'll get the job yet, but I feel proud of myself." "You should," he said softly. "You've already come further than most would." There was a pause, and then Maria asked, "But, how did you get my number?" The man chuckled lightly. "I asked the airline when I arranged your ticket. I hope that was all right." Maria hesitated, then laughed softly. "Yes, that's all right." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with a breath, the man said, "Maria, there's something I should tell you. Yesterday, you asked me why I helped. I told you it was because I understood what it felt like to wish for help. That's true. But there's more." Her grip on the phone tightened. She listened quietly. "My name is Richard Lawson," he continued. "I'm the CEO of Lawson Enterprises." Maria froze. The words didn't register at first. She had heard that name before on television, in newspapers, spoken with respect in the world of business. Lawson Enterprises was one of the biggest companies in the country, a name associated with power and success. You're the CEO," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "Yes," he said calmly. "But that's not why I wanted to tell you. I didn't want you to think of me as a title. Yesterday, on that flight, I was simply a man talking to a woman who reminded me of something I had forgotten, that there is more to life than success and wealth." Maria's knees felt weak. She sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the phone tightly. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why me? I'm just a single mother, struggling to get by." "You're not just anything," Richard said firmly. "You are strong. You are raising a son with love and sacrifice. You've faced more hardship than most people I know, and yet you still hold on to hope. Do you know how rare that is?" When you spoke about your son, your face lit up. "It reminded me of something real. Something I've been missing." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what to say. She had spent so much of her life feeling invisible, overlooked by the world. And here was a man of great importance telling her she mattered. Richard continued softly, I've spent years surrounded by people who only see what I can give them: money, influence, power. But with you, Maria, it was different. You spoke honestly. You weren't impressed by me, because you didn't know who I was. You treated me like a person, not a position. And that meant more to me than you can imagine. Maria pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. She remembered their conversation on the plane, the way he had listened, the way he had shared his loneliness. And now, she understood why his words had carried such weight. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Just say you'll keep in touch, Richard replied gently. I don't want this to be the last time we speak. Maria smiled through her tears. Yes. I'll keep in touch. From that moment, their lives began to intertwine in ways Maria had never expected. Richard called her again after a few days, not to talk about business, but to ask about Daniel, about her day, about her dreams. Maria found herself laughing during their conversations, something she hadn't done freely in a long time. For Richard, those calls became a light in his lonely routine. For Maria, they became a reminder that kindness and connection could exist even in the most unexpected places. Weeks later, Maria received the news that she had gotten the job. She cried with joy, hugging Daniel tightly as she told him. That night, she shared the news with Richard over the phone, and she could hear the genuine happiness in his voice. See, he said warmly. I knew you would succeed. Maria laughed. You believed in me more than I believed in myself. And though their worlds remained far apart, hers simple, his filled with wealth, the bond they had formed grew stronger with each passing day. Maria often thought back to that moment at the airport, the mistake that had led her to board the wrong flight. What had seemed like the worst error had turned into the beginning of something extraordinary. She had met a man who reminded her that she was not invisible. And he had met a woman who reminded him of what truly mattered in life. It was not wealth that connected them. It was humanity, kindness, and the simple truth that even strangers could change each other's lives forever. And so, what began as a mistake in an airport became the first page of a new chapter neither Maria nor Richard had ever expected. A chapter filled not with loneliness, but with hope, connection, and the promise of something more.